My name is Nathan, and I've always loved books. There's something magical about losing yourself in a story, letting the pages turn as you drift into another world. But sometimes, a book is more than just a story. Sometimes, it's a trap. It started when I moved to a new city. I was looking for something to do one afternoon, so I decided to explore a local library I had heard about. It wasn't anything special from the outside, just an old gray building tucked away on a quiet street. The sign out front said the Forgotten Library, but I didn't think much of it. I was always up for a good read, so I went inside. The library was eerily quiet. Not a single person in sight, just rows upon rows of dusty bookshelves. The air was thick with the smell of old paper, and the floors creaked with every step I took. I wandered through the aisles, letting my fingers graze over the spines of the books. But there was something unsettling about it. The books seemed too quiet, too still, like they were waiting for something. I reached the back of the library, where a small door stood. It was half hidden behind a curtain of cobwebs, as though it hadn't been opened in years. The sign above the door read, "Restricted Section." My curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the door open. Beyond the door, I found a narrow staircase that led down into darkness. The air grew cold, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. But I wasn't about to back down now. I had come this far. I descended the stairs, each step creaking beneath my weight. The further I went, the darker it became. And then, I saw it, the room at the bottom of the stairs. It wasn't a typical library. This place was different. The shelves were lined with ancient-looking books, their covers torn and faded. The walls were lined with strange symbols, scratched into the stone like some kind of forgotten language. But what really caught my attention was the book at the center of the room. It was sitting on a pedestal, bathed in a soft, unnatural light. The cover was a deep shade of crimson, with gold lettering that seemed to shimmer in the dimness. I couldn't resist. I approached the pedestal and opened the book. The moment I touched the pages, a strange chill washed over me. I felt the world around me shift. The air grew heavier, pressing in on me. I tried to pull my hand away, but it was as if the book had a hold on me. The pages began to turn on their own, flipping rapidly, as though someone was guiding them. And then, I heard it, a voice, soft at first, but growing louder with each passing moment. "You shouldn't have come here." I froze, my blood running cold. The voice wasn't coming from anywhere in particular. It was coming from the book itself, echoing through my mind. The words were chilling, filled with a sense of warning, but there was something else, something darker. "You will never leave." Panic set in. I tried to close the book, but the pages wouldn't stop turning. They were speeding up, faster and faster, until they were nothing but a blur. The voice grew louder, its tone more frantic, more desperate. "It's too late now. You're trapped." I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls pressing against me like a vice. The symbols on the walls began to glow, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance around me. I looked back at the book. The pages were no longer turning. They had stopped at a page that was completely blank. And then, I saw it written in a hand that wasn't my own. The words appeared on the page, glowing with an unholy light. "Nathan will never leave. He is ours." I screamed, trying to break free, but it was too late. The room, the library, the world itself, all of it seemed to fade away. The book had consumed me, dragged me into its pages, and now I was part of its story. I don't know how long it's been since that night. Time doesn't exist here. I've tried to escape, but every time I try to leave, I end up back in the library. The same shelves, the same books, the same restricted section, and the voice. It's always with me. "You're still here, Nathan. You'll never leave." I am now one of the forgotten, a part of the library. And if you ever visit, if you ever wander down that staircase, you may find my story waiting for you. A warning to anyone who dares open the book. But don't worry, the library is always looking for new stories. My name is Evelyn, and I've always been a skeptic. I don't believe in ghosts or supernatural things, or at least, I didn't, until that night. A lot of people would have run from what happened, but I didn't. Now, I wish I had. It all started when I moved into a new apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was cheap, and that's what I needed at the time. The building was old, a bit run down, but nothing that seemed too out of the ordinary. The apartment was on the top floor, at the very end of the hall. I thought it was a bit odd that no one else had taken it, but I shrugged it off. It wasn't my concern. The first few days were uneventful. I unpacked my things, settled into the quiet space. But then, it started. At night, when everything was still, I began hearing soft whispers. I thought it was the neighbors at first, maybe talking through the thin walls, but it didn't sound like normal voices. They were too soft, too distant, and always, they seemed to come from the walls themselves. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just the old building settling, maybe the pipes, or the wind, or something else rational. But the whispers kept getting louder. The voices didn't speak words at first, just unintelligible murmurs. But then, I began hearing my name, Evelyn. It was faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. It was a woman's voice, soothing but strange. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. There was no one there. I looked around, checking every corner of my apartment. Nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. The next night, I stayed up late, trying to catch whatever it was, and that's when it happened. The walls, they moved. I don't know how to explain it, but the walls seemed to pulse, like they were breathing. The soft whispers grew louder, turning into desperate, frantic voices. Evelyn, help us. I backed away from the walls. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't understand what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure. The apartment wasn't empty. It was alive. The next morning, I decided to leave, to get out of there, but when I reached the door, it wouldn't open. I twisted the knob, but it was as if the door was sealed shut, held in place by an invisible force. I pounded on the door, yelling for help, but there was no answer. The hallway was silent. Desperation began to set in. I tried every other door in the apartment, but they were all the same, sealed. I was trapped. The whispers in the walls had become louder now, almost unbearable. They were no longer just calling my name, they were begging, Evelyn, save us, save us. I collapsed to my knees, unable to think straight. I felt dizzy, disoriented. The walls seemed to close in on me. The air grew thick, suffocating. And then, through the whispers, I heard something that froze my blood. Evelyn, you're one of us now. I looked up, my eyes wide in terror, and that's when I saw it. In the corner of the room, standing just beyond the threshold of the living room, was a figure. It was pale, translucent, barely visible, but I could see the shape of it. It was a woman, tall, thin, with hollow eyes and a wide, twisted smile. She was inside the walls. She was part of them. No, I whispered, backing away, but the figure stepped forward, her limbs contorting unnaturally. She crawled along the walls, her head tilting at an angle that shouldn't have been possible. You can't leave, she said, her voice echoing in my mind. We need you, Evelyn. You belong to us now. I scrambled to my feet, my body trembling, but the apartment seemed to grow smaller, the walls pushing in. The whispers became a deafening roar, a chorus of voices pleading for help, cursing, crying. I ran to the windows, but they were sealed shut, too. I turned to the door, but the woman was there now, blocking the way. You can't escape, she hissed. I don't know how long I was trapped in that apartment. Time felt like it stopped, but eventually, I gave up fighting. I collapsed in the corner of the room, listening to the whispers that had now become my only companions. And then, I realized something. Those whispers, those voices, weren't asking for help. They were offering help. They were the souls of people who had once lived in this building, trapped inside the walls, forever prisoners of this cursed place. And now, I was one of them. My name is Lucas, and I've spent most of my life traveling. Long road trips, endless hours on the highway, always looking for the next adventure. But there's one place I'll never forget, a little diner on the edge of nowhere. It was just like any other night. I was driving through the back roads, trying to get to the next town before I ran out of gas. The roads were empty, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person alive. That's when I saw the sign Midnight Diner, glowing in the dark. It wasn't on any map, and I didn't recall ever passing it before. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled off the road. The diner looked run down, old, with flickering lights that made it seem like it belonged in another time. But the lights were on, and the smell of food was unmistakable. So I figured I'd stop for a quick bite as I walked inside. The bell above the door jingled, and I was greeted by a woman behind the counter. She had pale skin and dark hair, with a smile that seemed a little too wide, too perfect. But I didn't think much of it. People are strange sometimes. "Welcome to Midnight Diner," she said, her voice sweet, but with an odd edge to it. "What can I get you?" I sat at the counter and ordered a burger, something simple. The place was nearly empty, save for a few patrons sitting in the booths. They were all hunched over their meals, eating quietly, not speaking a word. It was eerie, like they were all part of the same strange dream as I ate. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woman behind the counter kept staring at me, her eyes never leaving mine. Every now and then, she would walk by, her footsteps too soft to hear, but I felt her presence, like she was just behind me, breathing down my neck. I decided it was time to leave, but when I looked around, I realized something. There was no door to the outside. The diner had no exit. I stood up, my heart pounding. I walked over to the door, the one I had entered through, but it wasn't a door at all. It was just a blank wall, smooth and featureless, as if there had never been an entrance. Panic set in. I turned to the woman at the counter, but she was still smiling, watching me with those unnerving eyes. "Something wrong, hun?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet. I need to go," I stammered, my voice shaking. "Where's the door? Let me out." She leaned forward, her smile growing even wider. "The door," she repeated, her voice cold now. "Oh, there is no door. Not for you." I backed away from her, my breath quickening. I tried to force my way through the wall, but it was solid, cold to the touch. My mind raced. I had to escape, but I couldn't. Something had trapped me here. The patrons in the booths didn't move, didn't look at me. They just kept eating, chewing their food in slow, deliberate motions. The silence in the room was deafening, and the air felt thick, as if time had stopped. Suddenly, the woman behind the counter let out a low laugh, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her eyes now gleaming with something darker. "This place isn't for people like you. You can never leave." I tried to break the window, but it was no use. The glass was unbreakable. My heart raced as the reality of the situation hit me. I wasn't just stuck in a diner, I was trapped in some kind of nightmare then. As I turned to look around the room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The patrons, the ones who had been eating in silence, were no longer human. Their faces were distorted, twisted, their eyes hollow and black. Their mouths were wide open, stretching unnaturally, their teeth sharp and jagged. They weren't eating, they were feeding on something far worse than food. They were feeding on the memories of anyone who entered the diner. I turned to the woman, the source of all of this, and her smile faded into something darker, more sinister. "Welcome to Midnight Diner," she said softly. "You'll never leave. You're ours now." I screamed, pounding on the walls, desperate to break free. But it was too late. The diners around me began to stand up, their monstrous forms closing in, their mouths opening wide, ready to consume me. I realized then that Midnight Diner wasn't a place, it was a trap, a never-ending cycle of lost souls, all trapped in that place, unable to escape. I was just another meal for them, just another person to feed on, and now, I wait. I wait for the next traveler, the next lost soul, to wander in. I wait for them to see the sign and enter, just like I did. Because once you're here, there's no way out, and they're always hungry. My name is James, and I've always been a bit of a skeptic. I don't believe in ghosts or supernatural phenomena. At least, that's what I thought. That was before I encountered something I can't explain. It was an ordinary Saturday afternoon when I decided to do some spring cleaning in my apartment. The place wasn't exactly dirty, but I figured it could use a bit of tidying up. I moved the couch, vacuumed the corners, and dusted off the old mirror hanging above the fireplace. It was an antique, passed down through my family. I'd always found it a little creepy, but it had a certain charm to it, so I kept it. As I polished the glass, I noticed something strange. The reflection in the mirror didn't seem to match the room I was standing in. The walls in the reflection were a different color, darker, almost black, and the furniture was not where it should be. The room looked wrong. I blinked and stepped back, convinced it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. After all, I'd been cleaning for hours, and my mind was probably a little foggy. But as I stared into the mirror, the reflection began to change. The furniture shifted, and a figure appeared in the corner of the room. It was a woman, tall, with long, flowing hair. She was standing still, watching me, but her eyes weren't focused on me. They were locked on something behind me, her gaze intense and unsettling. I spun around quickly, but there was no one there. The room was empty. I turned back to the mirror, and the woman was still there, her eyes following me. I could feel her presence, like she was trying to tell me something. I took a deep breath and approached the mirror again, closer this time. The woman's reflection smiled, a slow, sinister grin that made my stomach churn. Her eyes gleamed, with a knowing look, as if she was trying to communicate something through the glass. Before I could react, she moved, stepping forward in the reflection. I stepped back, heart racing, but the woman didn't follow me. She just stayed in the same spot, her eyes now staring directly into mine. I reached out, hesitant, and touched the mirror. The glass felt cold, colder than it should have, as though it had been frozen. My hand lingered on it for a moment, and that's when it happened. The woman's reflection reached out to me. Her fingers touched the glass where my hand was, and for a moment, I felt an icy chill travel up my arm. Then, to my horror, I realized that her fingers weren't just a reflection, they were coming through the glass. The mirror rippled like water, and her hand emerged fully, cold and pale, reaching for me. I screamed and stumbled back, falling to the floor. The mirror returned to normal, the reflection showing only the empty room once again. The woman was gone, but the cold lingered in the air, wrapping around me like a heavy fog. Shaken, I got up and immediately covered the mirror with a sheet. I thought I was imagining things, that maybe I was overtired or hallucinating. But the next few nights proved me wrong. Each night, I would hear strange noises, soft tapping, like fingers against glass. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the house settling, but the tapping grew louder, more insistent. It came from the mirror. I couldn't stand it anymore. I needed to know what was happening. So, I uncovered the mirror again, this time with a sense of dread hanging over me. I stared at my own reflection, hoping that whatever had happened would be gone. But it wasn't. The woman was back. This time, she was standing right behind me, in the reflection, her hand on my shoulder. I froze, my heart racing as I turned to look, but there was no one there. The room was silent, empty. I turned back to the mirror, and the woman smiled again, her grin wide and unsettling. But this time, something was different. Her eyes were no longer just watching me, they were pleading, as if begging for help. "Please," she whispered, her voice soft but clear, "help me." I didn't know what to do. The reflection seemed so real, like she was right there with me, but I couldn't understand what she wanted. She was reaching out, but the mirror kept her trapped. I reached for the mirror once again, unsure of what I was doing. But before I could touch it, the woman's reflection grabbed my hand, pulling me closer. Her grip was cold, her fingers tight around mine, and I could feel something darker behind her eyes. "Don't let go," she whispered urgently, but it was too late. As soon as I touched the glass, the mirror shattered. I fell back, covering my face as shards of glass flew in every direction. When I looked up, the room was completely silent. The woman was gone, but I wasn't alone. The whispers continued, not from the mirror anymore, but from somewhere deeper inside the walls. They were faint at first, but they grew louder, as if something or someone was trying to break through. I left that night, abandoning the house and everything in it. But the whispers never stopped, and now, wherever I go, I can hear them soft, persistent, like a voice calling from the other side of the glass. My name is Eric, and I've always been the kind of person who enjoys a good mystery. I've lived in my house for 3 years now, and for the most part, everything's been fine. But recently, I stumbled upon something that I can't explain, something that's been lurking right under my nose all this time. It started with a strange sound. It wasn't a knock or a creak from the old wood floors. It was more like a tapping, soft but persistent, coming from the walls. At first I thought it was just the house settling, but the noise continued. Night after night, I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But one evening, as I was cleaning out the basement, I discovered something unusual. A door. Now, I've been in this basement 100 times, but I'd never seen this door before. It was hidden behind a stack of old boxes, almost as if it had been deliberately concealed. The door itself was small, old, and covered in layers of dust. It didn't match the rest of the basement, which was typical for an old house. I was curious, but hesitant. Something about it felt wrong. But curiosity got the better of me, so I pulled the boxes away and slowly turned the rusty doorknob. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The hallway was cramped, dimly lit by a single bulb that flickered faintly overhead. The air was stale, thick with the smell of something forgotten. I took a few steps forward, my heartbeat quickening, and found another door at the end of the hallway. This one was different, newer, with a shiny brass handle. I reached for the handle, but before I could turn it, I heard something behind me, a voice, soft but clear, whispering my name, Eric. I spun around, but no one was there. The hallway was empty, just as it had been when I entered. I shook my head, trying to push away the growing unease, and opened the door. What I saw on the other side sent a chill down my spine. The room was small, barely big enough to fit a single bed. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the floor was littered with old furniture, some broken, some covered in thick layers of dust. But it wasn't the room itself that bothered me. It was the photographs, hundreds of them. They were pinned to the walls, each one showing a different face, strangers, people I didn't recognize. But the faces were off. Their eyes were wide, too wide, and their smiles didn't reach their eyes. They looked forced, as if they were trying to hide something. I could feel their eyes on me, watching me as I stepped deeper into the room. I moved closer to one of the photos on the wall. The image was of a woman, standing in front of a house I didn't recognize, her smile too bright, her eyes hollow. But something in the background caught my attention there. In the distance, standing in the shadow of the trees, was a figure. It was blurry, but I could tell it was watching her, watching me. I stepped back, my mind racing. I didn't know what I was looking at, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something I couldn't escape. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, and the light above flickered, casting the room into darkness. I turned around, panicking, but before I could move, I heard the voice again, closer this time. "Eric." I spun around, and there, standing in the doorway, was the woman from the photograph. Her smile was wide, too wide, her eyes empty and hollow, and she was holding something in her hands, something dark and sticky. Before I could react, she took a step forward, and the door slammed shut behind her, trapping me in the room. I tried to run, but the walls seemed to close in around me, the room growing smaller and smaller with each breath. The woman stepped closer, her eyes never leaving mine. And then, in a voice that sounded like it came from the depths of hell, she whispered, "You shouldn't have found it." The room went completely dark, and all I could hear was the sound of my own breath, heavy and quick. I felt something brush against my skin, cold, wet, like fingers, and then everything went silent. I woke up hours later, lying on the floor of the room, the photograph still staring down at me. The woman was gone. The door was open, and the hallway beyond was empty. But something had changed. As I walked back up to the main house, I noticed something strange. The photographs in the hallway, the ones I had passed before, were different. They all showed faces I had never seen before. But one thing remained the same: the eyes. They were all watching me, just like the ones in the room, and I could hear her voice, faint but clear in the back of my mind. "You shouldn't have found it." My name is Ava, and I've always loved the quiet of old houses. There's something about their creaking floors and dusty corners that feels safe to me, comforting even. That was before I moved into this house. Now, I'm not so sure. It was a small, cottage-style home on the outskirts of town, nestled in a quiet neighborhood. It was exactly what I was looking for: peaceful, secluded, with a charm that seemed to make the world outside disappear. But something wasn't right. I first noticed it on the second night after I moved in. It was late, around 2 a.m., and I was drifting off to sleep when I heard it. A faint sound, like a whispering voice, coming from beneath the floorboards. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, but the whispers, they were too distinct, too urgent. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. The voice was soft, almost a hum, but unmistakable. It seemed to be coming from the area near the fireplace, where the floorboards creaked the most. I pushed the covers off and walked cautiously towards the sound. The room was cold, and as I stood there, listening, I could feel the air growing heavier, thicker. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just one voice anymore, it was multiple, overlapping, like a chorus of hushed tones, pleading, begging, warning. I knelt down by the fireplace, my heart racing, and touched the floor. It felt colder than the rest of the house, almost icy. I pressed my ear to the floorboards, trying to make out what the voices were saying, but the words were muffled, indistinguishable. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. Absolute silence. I pulled away, my breath coming out in quick, shallow bursts, trying to make sense of what I just experienced. My mind raced, but before I could react, I heard it: the unmistakable sound of something moving underneath the floor. A scraping sound, as if something was trying to push its way through. I jumped back, my body frozen in place, and that's when I saw it. A small crack had appeared in one of the floorboards. It wasn't there before. I had checked earlier, when I moved in, and everything had seemed fine. But now, there it was, an open gap, just big enough for something to fit through. Against my better judgment, I grabbed a screwdriver from the toolbox and pried the board up. The moment I removed it, the air in the room shifted. The temperature dropped drastically, and the whispering started again, this time louder, clearer. It was as if something was desperate to get out. I leaned forward, peering into the dark space beneath the floor. The shadows were thick, impenetrable. And then, from the darkness, something shifted. A shape, a hand reached out from the shadows, long fingers curling as if beckoning me closer. I staggered back, my pulse pounding in my ears. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest as I scrambled to my feet and backed away from the hole. And then, I saw the eyes. Two glowing red orbs, staring up at me from the depths of the darkness. They blinked slowly, unblinking, until I couldn't look away. My body froze, as if those eyes had me under some sort of spell, drawing me in. "Help us," the voices whispered. "Help us before it's too late." I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't obey. I couldn't speak, couldn't scream, couldn't run. All I could do was stare into those eyes. The whispers became louder, frantic. The floor began to rumble, as if something was trying to escape, trying to break through. I broke free of the trance, finally managing to stumble backward, my heart thumping in my chest. I slammed the board back into place and bolted from the room. I locked the door behind me, my breath ragged, and pressed my back against the wall, struggling to process what had just happened. The whispers didn't stop. They followed me, echoing, in the corners of the house. Even with all the doors closed, with all the windows shut tight, I could hear them. They were inside my head now, not just under the floor. Every night since then, the whispers have come back. They never stop, and every time I try to sleep, I hear them, louder, clearer, like they're growing impatient. They want something. I don't know what, but I'm scared to find out. The only thing I know for sure is this: whatever is under the floor, whatever is trapped down there, is still waiting, and it won't stop until it gets what it wants. My name is Jack, and I've lived in this neighborhood for as long as I can remember. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the houses are all so close together. You can't help but notice when something's off. My next-door neighbor, Mrs. Whitaker, is an elderly woman who's been living here for decades. I've always waved at her when I saw her tending to her garden, though we never really spoke much. She had a lot of roses, more than anyone I've ever seen, and every spring, the entire yard would be filled with their sweet, fragrant smell. But that all changed about 6 months ago. I remember it clearly. I had just gotten home from work and was pulling into my driveway when I noticed the smell. It wasn't the sweet scent of roses that usually filled the air. No, this was something much darker. It smelled almost rotting, like something dead, decaying under the weight of time. I looked over at Mrs. Whitaker's house. Her roses were still there, but they were wilting. The garden was overrun with weeds, and the house itself looked a little more worn than usual. But what caught my attention the most was the figure standing near the fence. Mrs. Whitaker was there, or at least, it looked like her. Her face was pale, almost gray, and her hands were trembling as she pruned the roses. I could see her lips moving, but there was no sound. I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was just getting old, losing her touch. But the smell, it lingered, and it didn't go away. The next day, I woke up to the same stench, stronger this time. I could smell it from inside my house, even with all the windows shut. It felt like it was seeping through the walls, getting into my clothes, my skin. I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to check on Mrs. Whitaker, so I knocked on her door. No answer. I knocked again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. I pushed the door open, and a wave of that foul smell hit me like a brick. The house was dark, except for a faint light coming from the back. I walked through the living room, my shoes sticking to the floor, and found myself standing At the back door, I opened it slowly, and there she was, Mrs. Whitaker, standing in the middle of her garden, her back to me. But this time, there was something wrong. Her clothes were torn, and her skin was stretched tight over her bones, almost as if she was too thin. Her hair was falling out in patches, and her face was a mask of something far worse than old age. "Mrs. Whitaker," I called out, but she didn't respond. I took a step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I noticed the roses. They weren't roses anymore. The petals were black, curled in on themselves like dead things, and the stems, they were moving, twisting and writhing like they had a life of their own. I took another step closer, my breath coming in shallow gasps, and that's when I saw it. In her hands, she was holding a rose, but not just any rose. This one was different. Its petals were deep red, almost glowing in the dim light, and as she raised it to her nose, she smiled. "Do you smell it?" she whispered, her voice raspy and cracked. I froze. The smile on her face wasn't one of joy or contentment. It was a smile that sent a chill down my spine, a smile that was wrong in every sense of the word. I turned to run, but before I could move, I felt something grab my wrist. I looked down to see a vine, thick and black, wrapped around my arm, pulling me closer. The smell of roses overwhelmed me, suffocating me as I struggled to break free. I could hear her laughing softly, a low, unsettling sound that made my skin crawl, and then I saw it. In the center of her garden, there was a patch of ground that had been torn up, freshly dug. The soil was wet, and in the middle, there was a small wooden box, and beside it, a body wrapped in tattered clothes, the face hidden in shadows, but I could tell who it was. It was her husband, the one she had buried years ago, the one everyone thought had disappeared. "You smell it now, don't you?" she whispered, pulling me closer. "The roses have always been here. They just needed time to grow." And in that moment, I realized the truth. The roses weren't just plants. They were something far darker. And Mrs. Whitaker, she wasn't what she seemed. The last thing I remember before everything went black was her eyes wide, glowing, with that same twisted smile. My name is Ben. I'm a simple guy, just trying to live my life in peace. I moved into this neighborhood about a year ago, and it's been quiet, for the most part. Nothing too strange. But then, there's Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris lives in the house, across the street, the one with the peeling paint and overgrown garden. He's been here longer than I've been alive, but he's always been the quiet type. I've never actually spoken to him, though I've seen him walking around the yard, doing odd jobs, always keeping to himself. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then, I started noticing something. It was the window. Every night, without fail, I would glance across the street, and there he would be, standing at the window. He never moved, just stood there, staring out into the darkness. His face was always in the shadow, but I could tell he was looking directly at me. I tried to ignore it at first, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger every night. The strangest part, his lights were never on. The house was always dark. So how was he seeing me? How was he standing there, perfectly still, as if he knew exactly where I was? One night, I decided to confront it. I told myself I was just overthinking things, that there was no harm in it. So, I walked across the street, slowly, my feet dragging along the damp pavement. The wind howled through the trees, making the night feel colder than usual. I knocked on his door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Just as I was about to turn and leave, I heard a faint sound from inside, a scraping noise, like furniture being moved. I hesitated, then pushed the door open. The hinges creaked in protest, and the door swung inward, revealing the dark interior of the house. The air smelled musty, like it hadn't been aired in years. "Mr. Harris," I called out, my voice shaky. Nothing. I took a step inside, then another. The house was eerily still. There were no signs of life, no sounds, no movement. But then, I saw it. The window, it was open, just a crack. I approached cautiously, my eyes never leaving it. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the weight of the silence pressing down on me. And then I saw it, his face. He was standing behind the glass, just like before, staring directly at me. His eyes were wide, almost too wide, as if they didn't fit his face. His skin was pale, sickly even, and his mouth was stretched into an unnatural grin. I froze, my body refusing to move. And then, he whispered, "Don't come any closer." The voice was soft, but it was unmistakable. It came from the other side of the glass, as if he was right there with me. I took a step back, my heart racing. But before I could turn around and run, something caught my eye. On the windowsill, right where his hands had been pressed against the glass, I saw something dark and sticky. Blood. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. I ran out of the house, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't catch my breath. I don't know what happened to Mr. Harris. I don't know if he was ever real, or if he was just some twisted manifestation of my fear. But I do know one thing. Every night, when the wind picks up and the darkness presses in, I still see him, standing at that window, watching me, and I can't shake the feeling that one day, he's going to step out of the house. And when he does, he won't be alone. My name is Emily, and I've always considered myself a curious person. Some might even call it nosy. It's not that I invade people's privacy on purpose, but I enjoy knowing what's going on around me. It's the little things that catch my attention, the subtle details that others might miss. I moved into the house next to the Johnsons about 3 months ago. They had been living there for years, a quiet couple at least. That's what I thought. The house next door was a bit older, a bit worn down, but I didn't mind. The neighborhood was peaceful, and that's all I needed at first. Everything seemed normal. Mrs. Johnson would wave at me when she was watering her plants, and Mr. Johnson would give a polite nod whenever I walked past. But there was something about their house that always made me uneasy. It was a feeling I couldn't quite shake, like something was off. It started with the sounds. At night, I began hearing strange noises coming from their house. It wasn't always loud, just a soft creaking, like the house was shifting. But it wasn't normal. The house was sturdy. There shouldn't have been creaks and groans like that. Sometimes, I would hear whispers too, faint and indistinct, like someone was talking in the next room, or the walls. I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe it was the house settling, or maybe it was the wind. But as the days passed, the noises became harder to ignore. One night around midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. The whispers had turned into a low, persistent muttering, and I could swear I heard footsteps moving around inside. I grabbed my phone and texted Mrs. Johnson, "Everything okay? I hear strange sounds coming from your house." The response came almost immediately. "Everything's fine, dear. Just the house making noises. Don't worry." But that didn't sit right with me. The tone of her message was too calm, too rehearsed. It was as if she knew exactly what I was talking about, yet didn't want to acknowledge it. The next night, I couldn't resist. I decided to investigate. I went over to their house, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was slightly ajar. I knocked softly, but there was no answer. The air around me felt thick, as if the house was holding its breath. I pushed the door open, just a little. That's when I saw it. In the hallway, behind a cracked door, there was a shadow, a figure, standing still, watching me. It wasn't a person, not exactly. It was more like a shape, a dark, shapeless mass that seemed to stretch and move without making a sound. My breath caught in my throat as I stood frozen, staring at it. Then, The whispering began again, but this time, it was clearer. The voice was coming from inside the shadow. "Get out," it hissed. I stumbled back, my legs giving out beneath me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet were glued to the spot. And then, the door slammed. I bolted. I didn't stop until I was back in my own house, heart racing, hands shaking. I locked every door and window, hoping the night would pass without anything else happening. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was a dream, that I had imagined it. But when I looked out my window, the Johnson's house was as quiet as ever. No signs of life. Nothing moved. It was as if nothing had happened at all. That was until a few days later. I was outside in my yard when I saw Mrs. Johnson walking past my house. She didn't wave. She didn't even look at me, but there was something different about her. Her eyes were wide, vacant, like she wasn't really seeing anything. And then, I saw it, just behind her, in the shadows of the porch, a shape, a figure, just like the one I had seen the night before, watching me. But this time, it wasn't hiding. It was standing there, clearly visible, its dark form towering over her. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. Mrs. Johnson turned her head slightly, and for the first time, she looked at me. But there was no recognition in her eyes, no warmth, only emptiness. "Get out," she whispered, and I realized, in that moment, that I wasn't just hearing the voice of the shadow. I was hearing it from them. I never really paid much attention to the house next door. It was an ordinary place, a small rundown cottage that had been vacant for as long as I could remember. My name is Alex, and I've lived in this neighborhood for over a decade. I knew everyone around here, or at least, I thought I did. That was until the new neighbor moved in. It was a rainy evening when I first noticed the moving truck outside. I was on the porch, having a smoke, and saw the man unloading boxes. He wasn't someone I'd seen around before. Tall with dark hair, he seemed a bit off. I can't explain why, but there was something unsettling about him. The way he moved, the way his eyes darted around, always scanning, always searching. He didn't even acknowledge me as I watched him from my porch. The first few days were quiet. The blinds in his house were always closed, and I never heard much from inside. I figured it was just a lonely guy, someone who preferred solitude. But then, strange things started happening. It was on the fourth night when I first heard it. The knocking. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as the nights went on, I realized it wasn't. It was a rhythmic knocking, as if someone was pounding on the walls of his house. No, not just pounding. It sounded like someone was trapped inside, desperately trying to get out. I couldn't ignore it any longer. On the seventh night, I decided to confront him. I walked across the lawn, feeling the chill of the wind on my neck. When I knocked on his door, he opened it almost immediately, like he'd been waiting for me. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. His smile was forced, and his eyes didn't quite match it. There was something cold behind them. I live next door," I stammered. "I just wanted to ask about the noise. Are you okay in there?" He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, with a quiet laugh, he shook his head. "You must be hearing things. I haven't made any noise, but I could feel the tension in the air. It was like the walls of his house were closing in on me, suffocating me with a strange, heavy presence." I left quickly, my heart racing. As I walked back to my house, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me. I glanced over my shoulder and caught a glimpse of him through the window, standing still, staring directly at me. The knocking continued every night after that, each time louder and more frantic. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think straight. Then, one morning, I woke up to find something strange in my yard. A box, a small wooden box. It was buried halfway in the soil near my fence. I didn't know how it got there, but it didn't look like something that belonged to me. I opened it. Inside, there was a single old photograph. It was of Meov, my family, taken from my window. But that wasn't what scared me. What frightened me was the figure standing behind us in the photo. The same man. My neighbor. I looked up from the box, my breath caught in my throat. The knock echoed again from his house. But this time it was followed by a voice. "Come over, Alex. I have something to show you." It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. I didn't go. Instead, I called the police. But when they arrived, there was no sign of anything. No man, no truck, no boxers. The house next door was just as abandoned as it had always been. The only thing that remained was the box, and now, every night, I still hear the knocking. And sometimes, I feel eyes on me, watching from the shadows.